I have got a lot to say. This is going to be a tricky review. I know usually I do 2-minute reviews. They're short and quippy, and I'm still gonna try to keep this short. It's just that there's a lot going on. So first I want to start by saying how I even decided to read Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life. It was because I sort of stumbled across Jordan Peterson's lectures on YouTube. I just sort of stumbled across them one day, and I quickly became really interested in a lot of what he had to say. I found his perspectives really interesting. He's a psychologist from Canada who has entered the political scene somewhat only because of his views on certain subjects in Canada, which I'm not going to get into. We want to talk about his book today. So you can research all that if you want to, but I want to talk about his book. It's not to say we won't touch on some of his positions very, very slightly just because of how they come up in the book itself. But that's really not the point of this video. The point of this video is to review the book itself. So after watching probably hours, I have to admit, of his lectures and his interviews on YouTube, I decided to just cave. Like, I eventually gave in, and I really was interested in reading his book. The book is entitled 12 Rules for Life, and that in itself gives you the hint that this is a sort of self-development book, or a book that will better you, inspire you, all those sort of things. And while the book does have a lot of those aspects, it's also way more complex. Each chapter is one of these 12 lessons, and so he'll start with the rule of the chapter, 12 Rules for Life, remember. And what we end up doing is going on a journey, okay? And I mean that it's a journey, okay? So you start out with this main point, you take a path away from it, then you take a path off of that path, and a path off that path, and you end up somewhere completely different. At times I really felt that way, where he's a superfluous speaker, he's a superfluous writer as well. So it wasn't anything that really surprised me. I kind of half expected it going in. Now that's something that generally frustrates me with nonfiction. I don't like flowery nonfiction, but he is a very intellectual man. It's very interesting to hear his thoughts. But as far as labeling 12 Rules for Life as a self-help book, I would actually really discourage you from going in with that expectation. It's a much more intellectual book than that. We go in through a more traditionalist view, and it's interesting the way he describes things. I really enjoyed it from a mindset perspective, where he is going in with these traditional archetypes. So he's using things like Pinocchio, like princess stories, Grimm fairy tales, stories that we all know, these huge stories that are part of not only Western culture, but a lot of cultures in some form or another. And he's using those to explain his points about life itself, really. And we are going big. This is big scale. So really, a lot of the time I felt this book, 12 Rules for Life, could have been multiple books. On the one hand, it's self-help, and I felt like we could have pulled those lessons and put them into a shorter, more concise book. Then we're sort of going into religion a lot of the time, and this is something that really surprised me. I'm gonna get into in a minute. And then we're going into the intellectual side, or I should say the psychological side, about sort of almost what makes us tick a little bit, how you can master your mind a little bit, or your mindset a little bit better. And all of that was really interesting, but I almost felt like it was too much for this one publication. I would read more of his work again. I just feel like, let's split it up a little bit, because it's almost overwhelming, and thematically as a book, I feel that it veers quite a bit. That's not to say that the information itself isn't good, isn't fantastic, because it is, but it can also just be tiring a little bit. It's a little too much going on. So the religious aspect I wanted to talk about is that he uses Christianity and biblical references, biblical stories, to really explain a great number of his points. And by a great number, I mean most of it. So it's not that this offends me or anything. It's just that I wasn't expecting it going in. I'm not Christian. I was raised Christian, Presbyterian, in case you're curious. I'm not Christian now, but I do enjoy religious studies. I think it's really fascinating. I have like half a shelf on religious books. I like the study of it. So it didn't bother me. It's not like it, you know, annoyed me because he used it, but it was annoying because he used it so much that I almost felt like I was in Bible study. And that really happens for the middle third of the book, where almost everything is a biblical reference. It's interesting. I feel like he should write an annotated like version of the Bible. No joke. I would read his Bible study notes because the way he interprets it is very interesting. It's very fascinating, and I would love to read more about that. It's just not what I thought I was signing up for when I purchased this book. So I think expectations, as I've said before in a lot of my reviews, can make you feel really happy or really not happy about a book. So I just wanted to express that in this review video, because the biblical references and the lessons are a huge part of the work itself. There's nothing wrong with that, and I completely understand why he did it, because this book is really for Western civilization. It's for Western civilization thinking, and the Bible, of course, is a massive part of what has defined our culture and our society. So it would be neglectful to say that it didn't, because of course it did. It's just that I had wished for a reader, or as a reader, and to reach more readers, that he had used more of the story archetypes like Pinocchio and the princesses and Hansel and Gretel and things that he touches on in the last quarter of the novel. If he had, not the novel, of the book, if he had used more of those different types of references as explanations throughout, I really think it would be more relatable and it would really touch more people. So I think if you are Christian, if you are interested in religion, you're gonna see a lot of things that are familiar to you. And I definitely studied a lot of Christianity. I always get the Christian Jeopardy questions right. I don't know how it happened, but those facts are like somehow buried in there, like all those years of Sunday school. I don't know, it's implanted. So just be aware of that going in, that it is heavy with Bible references. So to make his point, as I was saying, we make a point and then we go on a path and then a path off that path, right? And so it's very big, very large scale. And at the end of the chapter, we sort of come back to the core. And sometimes I wouldn't even know how we really got back to the core message of that chapter, but it just seemed that suddenly we arrived there. And that was fine. I just felt that it was a bit convoluted. So there's these great lessons, really great lessons. It's just that you have to really go on a journey to get there. So don't go in expecting it to be efficient, because it's not efficient at all. It's superfluous, it's a bit convoluted, but the lessons are there, the insights are there, and all of them were very interesting to me. So the first 2/3 of the book can get exhausting. I'm not gonna lie to you. There was a point there in the middle where I was like, I didn't know if I could really make it through. If I had been reading this in paperback or hardcover, I was listening to it on Audible, just to clarify, via audiobook. If I had been reading this in regular format, I don't think that I would have made it through. Just because in the middle of the book, it gets very dense, it gets very heavy, it's very Bible study centered. I really felt like I was in a theology class at some points, and that's just not what I was looking for when I decided to read this book. What I was looking for and what I expected was a little bit more self-help and more straight to the point and not quite so intellectual. I appreciate both sides. It's just that I wasn't expecting that when I started reading it. So let me explain to you why this was a little disappointing for me. I have a certain schedule, if you will, with audiobooks where I basically listen to nonfiction audiobooks in the morning to sort of help me with my routine and get me in a good mindset, to inspire me, to encourage me to do better. And then in the afternoons and evenings when I'm cleaning or whatever, I'll listen to more light stuff, fiction, that sort of thing. So when I decided to use this, or to purchase this as an audiobook, I was looking for something inspiring, motivating, all the things that you want with first thing in the morning. Now, I didn't always find that with this book. I think if my expectation had been different, I would have enjoyed it more, but I also probably wouldn't have picked it up because I don't often read these superfluous nonfictions. So I'm glad I picked it up. It's just that it did not meet that mark for me. And that was my own expectation because of the title and because of how it's categorized. So I want to be really clear on that. First 2/3, great insights. It's just that you have to dig to get to them. It was still good, just heavy. Now the last quarter, the last 1/3 of the book, thereabouts, you start to get into it. And I really felt that the last quarter of the book was how the entire book should have been. That's when we're really getting into the personal stuff, the psychological stuff. That's when I felt like the really helpful things for everyday life came into play. There was still the biblical references, but they weren't quite so heavy-handed, and it was interspersed with a lot of different archetypal stories that we can all relate to and that we all know. And I understand why he used them, because they're things we all know. That's how you explain these big concepts, right? By common ground. So I loved that he did that. I loved a lot of what he had to say about his personal life, his personal beliefs, watching his YouTube videos and his lectures and those sort of his interviews. That's what I was looking for more of, was his own insights, his own perspectives on these things. So I was glad to get a bit more of that. That's when he gets more into his political thoughts, which are very anti-socialist, anti-neo-Marxism. I'm not gonna get into that stuff, but that's really where he gets into that sort of thing. He also gets into more of the psychology of things and gives some great advice for just maintaining your life, for, as the book title says, an antidote to chaos. That's when I feel like we really got into the heart of it. So it took us about 3/4 of the book to get into what I felt the meat of that book should have been. So as I said before, I really feel like there's a lot going on in this book. We could have probably taken everything he said. There's a lot of insight, there's a lot of interesting perspectives that, whether or not you agree, are just fascinating to mull over and to think about. We could have just separated them and we could have all been reading 3 different books. That's really how I feel about it. So all in all, I'm glad that I read it. I think that he is a very insightful, interesting person, and I like to hear his perspectives. Do I agree with everything he says? No. Do I agree with a lot of what he says? Yep. So if you're reading this because you're interested in what he's had to say and you want more of that, you're gonna get it. Just be prepared that just as he is in his interviews and his lectures, he is a bit superfluous. He does meander, and there's nothing wrong with that. I just want you to understand that going in, that it's not your typical like quick and dirty life tips that you might expect from a lot of the self-help genre. So do I recommend it? Yes, I do, but only to a certain audience. Only if you sort of know what you're getting into and you know that you're going to be interested in what he has to say. You're probably watching this after having already seen some of his lectures and his YouTube videos. If you're looking for more of that, or if you're looking for more insight into what he has to say on a lot of different topics about life, about society, about culture, all of which are very fascinating, you're going to find them in that book. They are there. So it's a bit of a hybrid. It's not quite a self-help book. It's almost theology. It's about story structure a lot of the time. I felt it very interesting as a writer and someone who studies story, how much he gave as far as traditional stories and why they work and why they have an impact. So again, there's just a lot going on. I think I'm going to give this either a 3.5 or a 4-star, just because I felt thematically what the book promised and is advertised as is a bit different from what it actually ended up being. And I think if you change expectations and the way things are categorized, people go in a lot more happily because they know what to expect and they know what they're getting out of it. So it's long, it's deep, it's heavy at times, hard to get through at times, but the core messages are there and they are good. So if you're interested in picking up his book, I say go for it. If you're not sure yet and you're just like, who the heck is Jordan Peterson anyway, go ahead and Google him and watch some of his videos, and you're gonna know right off the bat if he's someone you want to learn more about or someone whose perspectives you want to learn more about. I should say that instead of getting to know him. His closing statement is about how he hopes the book has helped the reader in some way. He hopes that it has pointed out things that you already knew but maybe didn't realize you knew, and that he hopes you can wish well and that he wishes you well. So thematically, I think we're a little bit all over the place with the book. I think he's a very intelligent person, a very learned person, and it might have been difficult for him and his publishers to decide quite what to include or not include. That's it for this one, guys. It was a good book. I'm glad I read it. It made me think about some things the same, some things differently, some things I agreed with, some things I didn't agree with. But God, wouldn't it be boring if I just agreed with everyone all the time? So it's up to you. You definitely want to be in somewhat of his vein of thinking and understand where he's coming from before you read the book. It's definitely for a more conservative audience, and you should know that going in. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope that you have enjoyed this video and that this review was a little bit more enlightening for you as far as what's actually included in Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life. And if you did like this video, can you do me a huge favor and just give it a thumbs up? Leave a comment below. Let me know what you think, if you've read it, if you want to read it, what you think about the book itself. I'd love to know. If you haven't subscribed already, I really don't know what you're so afraid about. Just go ahead and press the subscribe button. If you want more bookish videos, book reviews, TBRs, wrap-ups, book hauls, all the bookish things, I'm your girl. So go ahead and press that subscribe button, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks for watching.